Hey everybody, this is Lisa Harper, and you're listening to the Not Ready Yet Curating Conversations for the Aging Journey podcast. This is the show that changes the conversations we have with our loved ones about aging and life decisions. Let's have more honest conversations where we speak the quiet parts out loud. Today, I'm joined by Melanie Henry, founder and CEO of the Driver Cognitive Assessment Center, or DCAC, an organization dedicated to providing cognitive evaluations for experienced drivers. Melanie brings decades of experience in social welfare, risk assessment, and child protection. During her time as a volunteer driver medical ride coordinator, she recognized a critical gap: the need for objective and compassionate assessments to help families navigate the often difficult conversations around driving and aging. That realization led her to create DCAC. She's a licensed driving instructor and driver rehabilitation professional, as well as the co-author of two best-selling NAIPC books, Difficult Aging in Place Conversations and Aging in Place Conversations, The Caregiver's Guide. Melanie is also a sought-after speaker on aging and driving topics, a CarFit volunteer and event coordinator, and recently expanded her mission with the launch of Turn Signal Driving School, helping new and seasoned drivers alike build confidence and stay safe on the road. Welcome to the podcast, Melanie. It's so wonderful to have you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. And so we all have a story to tell. What led you to the field of driver evaluation and instruction?
It's kind of was a little bit of a windy road, as they say. My father had vascular dementia that was undiagnosed when we lived in Australia, and he was still driving, and it was truly a terrifying time. There weren't a lot of resources that I was aware of at the time, and thankfully he didn't injure anyone. But when we moved to the US, I was working with like an older population. I was a private caregiver for a while. And then I was running a medical ride volunteer driver program. And it was through that program that I really saw an identified need, because we had a lot of our clients, we were giving medical rides and taking them to their health appointments. And some of them had, cognition concerns and physical concerns, but they were still driving. And we were also seeing it at the senior center where we were located, people that would often, leave their doors open, their keys in the ignition, the car still running, and be inside playing bingo or poker. So I was like, well, how are we assessing this group of people? We know that we have an older population that's only booming and increasing. How are we assessing these drivers without involving all of the government bodies and all of the physicians all of the time? Because many families want to have that privacy. So I learned about this technology out of Canada. And because of my background, I was able to bring that technology to the Bay Area. And yeah, it's wonderful, wonderful information for families and drivers about, where they're currently at. So that's kind of how it started.
And so what is that technology? Could you elaborate on what that exactly is?
Yes, it's through a company called DriveAble Empirica. They're based in Canada, been around for about 30 years, and they are one of the world leaders in impairment assessment technology. And what they created back in the day through a neurologist who needed a driving evaluation for his patients and nothing existed, so he partnered with the university. They've come up with an assessment tool that in an iPad, on a digital tablet, it sits on a stand, and it's measuring all of the driving skills from a cognition point of view, from a mental fitness to drive aspect. And the person touches the screen, they interact with it, there's a voice on it, and I'm there with them guiding it through it. There's opportunity for practice. So that particular portion is like measuring the interaction of those cognitive abilities that we need for safe driving. And it's a predictive score. And then the person has a break, and then they go out on road in our evaluator vehicle. And of course, they're not alone. And I'm taking them through a specialized functional driving evaluation, which was designed for our area by DriveAble. And that one, I'm looking for what kinds of driving errors is this person potentially making? Because we know that drivers with cognitive impairment, they make different driving errors to healthy, normal drivers, like especially with left-hand turns. And there's changes in their depth perception and judging how close a car is or how far away and the speed that they're doing. So that second part of the assessment, I'm looking at what type of driving error, the frequency, the severity. I have an iPad. I'm giving them directions on when we need to drive. And then together, the two results give a composite score, what's called a driver risk score. And there's parameters within that. And then we can see really clearly, is a person still in the green, healthy, normal zone? Or are they in a moderate yellow zone where we can see things are starting to change? And the drivers that are in the red zone, they're the ones that need to really seriously think about hanging up the keys. And so my assessment centre is set up where it's like a wraparound service model. If I have a driver who's no longer safe, I meet with the family and with the driver, usually by Zoom, sharing the results on the screen and talking about next steps, and we get them connected with all of the transportation in the area where they live, because we know that those next 6 months, it's such a life-changing event. If we don't have all the supports in place, that person's at really high risk for depression because of the isolation that can potentially happen. So yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell. And then for those safe drivers, or I have other drivers that call, I can do a driver refresher where I'm taking them out and kind of doing some skill building. But in those kinds of cases, the person doesn't have any cognitive impairment issues.
Okay. So that's an option for people that are being proactive and are coming forward, raising their hand, saying, I think I need to reassess where I'm at. And so I know in the chapter you authored in the Aging in Place Conversations, the Caregiver's Guide, you reference research that shows most adult kids would rather talk about their parents' funeral plans than talk about whether they should give up their keys. And so I think that makes such a huge statement as far as how touchy this conversation is and how emotionally charged these conversations can be. So we're hoping to shape the conversations here. How do we come at this more as a shared problem and have the goal be balance safety and dignity? What can we help and share with the adult kids today?
Yeah. It is a really touchy subject for so many. And, I have families that call me after there's a crisis where they've not handled things well. And it is, from my point of view, Lisa, it is really a community responsibility. It's also about the conversations that adult kids are having with their parents' physician. Like if you are concerned about your mum or dad's driving, you can always write a letter to your physician, because a lot of the physicians, they also don't want to have the conversation. A lot of them, they don't have the expertise, the time limit. And so they're being guided by what the families are in fact saying about mum or dad's driving. And then the driver, the patient, they don't want to talk to the physician about it because they're worried their doctor will then report them to the local Department of Motor Vehicles, and then their license will be suspended, and then that whole process that goes along with that. So I do have some tips on how to manage it. And if families could reframe it and come from a place of love and care and compassion, and really put yourself in the shoes of your parent, because it is such a life-changing event. And there's a mentality here in the US that driving is a right. It's not seen as a privilege. It's kind of like an entitlement. And we don't have a lot of the infrastructures in a lot of the cities for people to get around like we do like there is in Europe or in other parts of the world, And if you're in a rural community, or you're taking care of your partner, your spouse, who's no longer able to drive, there's a lot of pressure within families to try and keep mum as safe as we can behind the wheel, and those conversations don't always get addressed the best way. So the number one thing is make sure your parent or whoever you're a care partner with, make sure that they're staying on top of their vision exams, because 90% of what we're processing, the decisions that we're making behind the wheel, are through our eyes, and also with hearing, okay? Go for a ride along. And by that, I mean, every time you go to visit your parent, if you're out of state, with the holidays coming up, get in the car with your parent and go to all of their normal destinations. And you're just observing, you're not giving any feedback, no commentary is needed. And just see how their driving skills are. And I've got a warning signs checklist as a resource for your viewers, your listeners. There's a lot of warning signs, and when you start to see a pattern, then it's time to kind of have a conversation. So being prepared before you even start all of this is a really great idea. All of the family who's directly involved really needs to do their best to try and be on the same page, because there's often like one family member that doesn't see that there's an issue because maybe they live out of state, or they're not as close to that parent and they're not really involved in their day-to-day care, as where you may have another sibling that is really actively involved, and or their tolerance of risk is maybe a lot higher than the other sibling. And in families where there are no siblings and it's just the spouse, that puts an additional layer, because sometimes that pressure is on to keep driving behind the wheel and there isn't anyone kind of reviewing what's going on. So the ride-along's really important. And then if you have a parent and you're seeing changes in how they're managing at home, like not balancing the checkbooks and managing finances when they used to be able to do that really well, even like personal care, if they're starting to forget on a day-to-day basis, if you're starting to see changes in activities of daily living, if a person's fallen twice in the last year, if they've had a recent admission, going out for that ride-along is super critical, because it's going to give you some baseline information. Listening, like when you go to visit over Thanksgiving, bringing up the conversation about, the increase in traffic or how drivers are out there. Listening for things like, I can't believe how many people are honking the horn when I'm out on the road. That's a red flag. Look for any damage on the vehicle, on the garage, on the post, on the mailbox. Any scrapes or dents that are kind of minimized, or your parent, loved one doesn't really have an explanation about, is kind of a good a segue to kind of get into the topic. Hey, Mum, what happened here? Or if there's been a change in medication, or they've recently come home, or they haven't driven for a few months because they've been rehabbing, it can kind of be a good way to get into that conversation. But if someone's coming from a real place of love and care and compassion, you can say things like, we want to be able to have as many more Thanksgivings like this with you, more holiday festivities. We don't want to be worrying about you and visiting you in a nursing home or in a hospital setting because you've had a collision. Because we know from the research, the human body doesn't stand up really well to being injured behind the wheel, whether you're a passenger or the driver, as you get older, especially over 85. Human body becomes more frail. And so if you can really come from that viewpoint with your loved one, that we just want to make sure that you're okay. And with everyone being on the same page, where I see families fall apart here, Lisa, is that they think that having the most outspoken, domineering, bombastic family member be the one to have the conversation, bring this topic up, because nobody wants to bring it up. They think that they're doing the right thing by doing that. It usually backfires. You want to decide on the person that's closest to your mum or dad, whether it's the spouse or a sibling or maybe a friend, a neighbor, that they be the one to gently bring up this topic and save the person that is, this is how it's going to be. Save that person being the enforcer. So if there's going to be some driving changes like, Mum, you can't drive on the freeway anymore, or we don't want you going to the Rotary group at night, see if you can find a Rotary that's in the daytime, like whatever it might be, like save that person for enforcing all of that is a really good thing. And if you do have a parent that's got cognitive impairment, and whether that's been assessed or not, or you've just started to have some conversations with the doctor about it and, gathering all the information, certainly seek some legal advice. You don't want to leave things too late. And I don't know what it's like in other states. I can only speak for California, but the litigation is a really big piece of all of this, especially if someone is injured and the other party finds out that there is cognitive impairment concerns, it can really kind of ramp things up from a financial point of view. And many older people, they've worked really hard all of their lives. And sometimes for some families, when they say, Mum and Dad, you don't want to lose everything that you've worked for. Sometimes that's enough to get them to really think about, okay, I need to get my driving reassessed and just see that I'm still safe.
Just to clarify, when you say the closest sibling, it's not closest in location, it's closest in who knows them the best and who are they most likely to listen to and heed a little bit more from.
Yes.
So I just wanted to make that clarification. And I think that's a great point you make between how the siblings work, because sometimes they think the one that's the enforcer is going to be the one to go in there. That firsthand experience of, sometimes we have opinions on what we think is going on, but being in the car with them and doing that ride along, that is really telling. And it may be that it's okay, because not all older drivers are unsafe behind the wheel.
Yeah.
Some kind of already stop and start to restrict their own driving. They're like, I don't want to drive at night, I'm not taking the highway. I mean, they'll start to do things like that anyways. So I definitely want to make it clear that ride along is going to be very telling. And we will have the warning signs checklist that you've provided in the show notes so that people can reference that. And I know you make a point to say, familiarize yourself with that. You're not sitting there in the car with them like you're the driver assessor. You're not taking the checklist with you. We don't want this to be intimidating. We want it to be a welcome. Yes, you're gathering information, but review those checklists beforehand. And I think your guidance is if there's 5 or more of those items, that it could be then something to warrant further conversation, because the warning signs fall into behavioral, like physical, and then social, correct?
Yes. There's, I just tried to do that to kind of make that a little easier. And the thing too, Lisa, right? Most drivers, when they start to see changes in their own driving skills, they will restrict or they will stop driving. It's the driver with cognitive impairment that seems to be the most reluctant. And it's not that they're being defiant, it's because they truly believe that they're still a good, safe driver. They've just lost some capacity for insight around that. And so if you have a family member and you're concerned that there is cognitive decline going on and you've gone out for the ride along and you come back and you want to talk about it, expect that there'll be that resistance and that they'll maybe dismissive and say, I don't want to talk about it right now. But you've got to really be the adult in the room here and come back and revisit it as soon as you possibly can, like maybe later that day or maybe the next morning, and try and talk about it again. And if you can, if you're visiting, go out for another ride along, like the next day or the day after, and repeat this process so that you have the more information you can gather, the more you can kind of share. And you don't want to personalize it. Like you just want to say, like, Mum, maybe since you've had that heart surgery, we've noticed some changes with your driving skills, and acknowledge what a great driver she's been for 60 years, because that's the reality. Most drivers talk about their driving skills in a past tense. I haven't had a collision for 55 years. I've always been a great driver, but things can change. Acknowledging that.
You mentioned earlier that 90% of the info we rely on in driving comes through the eyes, which is pretty fascinating, but does make sense. And I read a statistic that at age 60, our pupils can shrink to about a third of the size they were at age 20. So, and that has to do with the light getting in, correct? How do those things go together with your field of vision?
Okay, so because we rely so much on our vision to make those decisions, and then we've got all these changes that are going on, very normal with aging for all of us, right? That this ability to be able to focus on small objects and print and be able to look at your dashboard in the car, and then looking at your side mirrors and your rear view, and then being able to switch from far to near. What happens is a lot of older drivers can also then have what we call reduced peripheral vision, which is being able to see everything at the sides, being able to see if there's a car in your blind spot beside you. Every vehicle has a blind spot. And so we need good peripheral for defensive driving. So we need to know that, before we change a lane, we need to know if there's somebody in that lane, or a cyclist or a motorbike, whatever it might be. So, but what's happening with the cognition is that we've got, like, physically there's changes going on, there's vision changes, and then when you add cognition changes for those individuals that are experiencing that, our brains are also processing information more slowly. We have slower reflexes as we get older. But with someone with cognitive impairment, it's kind of really amplified. And there's a term called useful field of view that occupational therapists and people in this field talk about. And it's about the amount of area that you can see when you're behind the wheel. And someone with a healthy, normal field of view, they're able to see the pedestrian that's walking off the crosswalk and a cyclist that's crossing the street. But when someone has cognitive impairment, that useful field of view shrinks and it becomes very narrow. And so they miss seeing all of that unexpected information, like the mum that's on the phone with the child in the stroller that just walks off and doesn't look before she steps out onto the crosswalk. So it can really impact driving ability. And that's why these evaluations are so important, because it's going to give that baseline. But when the challenge too, right, is when somebody goes to the doctors, say they have mild cognitive impairment, other people around them are starting to notice that there are changes, but the whole thing is that it's not serious enough. Those changes are not serious enough to be classified as dementia. And so quite often a person in early stages of or even mild cognitive impairment, if it's not being diagnosed, they can go to their doctor's office and they'll present really well during a routine visit. And so that's why it's so critical that the family be involved, because families know their parents much better than anybody else. And you've lived with them, you're seeing the changes, you're all growing together. And so the doctor's offices also rely on that information from the family about, what are they actually seeing? And so going out for that ride along is super important. And if you do go back out and you see a couple of things, just keep an eye on it. You might need to review it every 3 months. Maybe you need to ask a neighbour to go out for a ride along, and keep it all really informal. But if you are seeing a pattern, or you're seeing really serious things that are happening, then it's time to kind of bring up that conversation. Say, hey, Mum, we're worried. We need to, maybe talk to the doctor about what's going on. I'm worried that maybe your medication might be impacting. A lot of people will be on multiple medications and don't realise or haven't read the instructions, and it can even in fact impact, their driving abilities, especially some of the Parkinson's medications. There's a lot for families to be thinking about with this, and, tons of resources out there, and I hope that people can access that.
So we've talked about, the eyes do play a large factor in this, and you were talking about hearing earlier and reflexes, and then medicine and how that can maybe affect balance. And in the book mentioned our arthritis and neuropathy. And so there is kind of this puzzle to put together. What is it that they have going on? And then understanding how all of that may affect in time, right? Maybe not right now, but may affect the ability to drive. I think a lot of us think about eyesight, and there's really a lot more that could be going on to take into consideration. Yeah. So I just wanted to mention that, because I think that was kind of an aha for me too.
There's an easy thing that families can do too. Like, watch how your parent walks. Watch how they get up out of the chair at home, how they're moving around the house, how they're moving around when you're out on the street. Are they shuffling? Watch how they can step up and down off the curb. Like, can they lift their right foot to get up to the curb? And if they can't, that's kind of a red flag right there, that they may have some trouble then shifting from the brake to the gas in a quick movement. Yeah. Right? There's lots of little tips like that can kind of help when families are just not sure, because the reality is families do worry more than all the professionals, right? That's very normal, because you're coming from a place of love. But sometimes those fears are not really justified. Like, I can't tell you how many families I have that say, oh, my mum shouldn't be driving because she's 80. My oldest client has been 94. Age is just a number when it comes to driving because it really holds up usually pretty well in our long-term memories. So
Yeah, and that's why I definitely want to make that statement again that just because, we're talking about age does not mean they're unsafe behind the wheel. We really have to drill that home. One of your stats in the book is from Storefront Safety Council,
oh,
which is amazing to even know that exists because there's a Panera here locally that somebody has driven into the front of that multiple times, even this year, it seems. I know twice. And so when you were talking about that, it reminded me of that stat that the most frequent cause is there's operator error and then there's the pedal error. And it's like when you start to break down the minutia of what we're doing in the car to make the car go safely and to be safe in that car, how do they plan for, like you mentioned earlier, that first 6 months after not driving? One of the biggest things we talk about is isolation, and that it's been reported that it's like smoking 15 cigarettes a day to your health and your mortality rate. Isolation. So how do families, if they know this is imminent, the conversations are happening, we don't know if we're taking if the keys will have to be turned over in 6 months, a year, 2 years, but what can families start to think? Because I like to plant these seeds of be thinking about this before you have to. You mentioned that 6 month window. Why is that so important, and what should families be preparing for?
yeah, I think for anyone that's listening to this, like having a plan is really important and involving your parent, your loved one in that plan. AAA, and I can send this to you. I don't think I did, Lisa. There's a driver planning agreement that AAA and the American Occupational Therapy Association put out, and it's like a planning agreement that you do with your mum. Feel very much part of that process about what's going to happen, but start to find out like what are all the resources in the community where your parent lives. And a lot of the senior centres have volunteer driver programs, and there's a lot of private programs. It seems to be more of a problem when you live outside of a big city and you're in a rural area. But in a lot of those communities, there's a real community network where people will help each other get to the store, and the senior centres become kind of a central hub. But yeah, definitely knowing your resources, gathering what you can. Don't wait till there's a crisis. Find out about what in-home care agencies offer transportation. And I'm here as a resource. I get a lot of people from all over the US that call who need help in navigating what is available. And a lot of the counties have county-funded transportation programs when drivers are retiring. Some of them are reimbursements, some of them, they all kind of fall under paratransit. You'd be surprised in the biggest cities, but definitely a challenge in the rural area. But I'm here as a resource if anybody ever needs to kind of reach out and get some info about that.
Well, that's wonderful. Get prepared, get some information. That's what I hope the listeners are doing. And if they're still here listening to us now, they may have a situation that they're trying to prepare for and get ready, and all the information and tools that can be made available. It's a great start, right? It just, when you have more information, you feel better equipped to even start that conversation. And like I say, these are emotionally charged and delicate. It's just approaching all of that with sensitivity and being in their shoes, step into that, and that empathy. Say the adult kids, it's like we see A to B and we want to fix it and solve it, and that's not what this is. These are conversations, these are observations that take period over time, and you're gathering information, and then you have a conversation. And in the book there'll be a link to Aging in Place Conversations, the Caregiver's Guide, because there are conversation starters in there. That is what it's about. A lot of times people worry about their parent and getting them to a medical appointment. And we think about it more in the medical world, and I'm always trying to keep that socialization going too. So, they need community. So in that first 6 months, it's not just about medical needs and getting somewhere. It's about social needs and getting to church or getting to go play bingo or at the Rotary Club, whatever that equals. It's not, I feel like when I hear people talk, it's about transportation to this appointment, this appointment, this appointment. And if that's all they're getting out for, we have to be sensitive to that too and understand that they need the whole. They need all of those wonderful interactions that we all get when we get with our friends or go do some fun activity. And we can kind of lose track of time and forget, all of our, pains and ailments and things. And they need that too. So those first 6 months, that's really important.
Yeah, and you're going to get a lot further with your parent if they have been resistant to a driving evaluation. If you've got some ideas about all of that and you've already done your homework and you can say, so and so can help get you to church and so will pick you up to bring you into here. And, when there's a plan, it seems to go over a lot more smoothly for everyone. What you're trying to do is you're just wanting to make a transition, help them support a transition from driver's seat to passenger seat, not be missing out on anything that's going on in their life, and if anything, enriching it even further.
Yeah. Agree, 100%. And there's some tips we could share about, everyone is afraid to start these conversations, and I say bring sound and voice to these things because you're thinking them. And the only way, nobody's a mind reader, not even your parent. So the only way is to, I'm worried about your safety. Make them I statements. It's not, you shouldn't be driving. Of course, if somebody approaches you and says you shouldn't be doing something, your immediate reaction is, huh? Yeah. And so just to kind of focus on those shared goals that I think in the beginning, we talked about the balance of safety and dignity. It really is about that. And I hope that this helps people start that conversation. Melanie, and is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners that you would feel remiss if we did not?
Oh gosh. I don't think so, other than read the book, download the book. It's super cheap. It's lots of great information in there, not only on driving, but also other resources for caregivers and just reframing this whole journey that everybody seems to be on. I don't know if I have anything more other than there's a lot you can do and strengthen that relationship that you have with your family member, with your mum or dad, and trust the process through this. Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, because in aging, I think of this podcast sometimes as an education on aging because we don't really get that. As things progress, if you're having these conversations, those conversations become a lot easier. They're a bit harder if you start out in the middle of a crisis and you don't have as many options. Give yourself that. And like you say, as the holidays come, there'll be those moments of interaction. Just know that you're there to support, and it is about leading with love and logic because we have so much information. Get the information you need so that you can present it and you guys can have a conversation. There'll be resources available on how to contact Melanie and also the checklist of the warning signs for when you go out with that ride along with your parent and some other resources so that you feel better equipped to have these conversations and that you and your family feel like you're moving in the right direction together. So Melanie, thank you again. I really appreciate you.
You're so welcome. All the best to everybody out there. Be brave.
Yes, same. Yeah, safe. Drive safe.
Stay safe.
They're listening in the car right now. Stay safe.
And be brave to have that conversation. You'll be glad. It's something that everybody needs to kind of talk about.
Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity, Lisa.
You are so welcome. Thank you, Melanie. Thanks for joining me on Not Ready Yet, Curating Conversations for the Aging Journey. If something in this episode gave you clarity or the courage to start an important conversation or offered a new way to look at things, I hope you'll share it with someone who might need the same encouragement. Remember, navigating aging isn't something we have to do alone or in crisis. With love, logic, and the right tools, we can face what's next with confidence and connection. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're feeling generous, leave a review. It helps others find the show. And just a quick note, The information shared on this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute for medical, psychiatric, legal, or other professional advice. Always consult a qualified professional for guidance tailored to your unique situation. This is Lisa Harper, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.